So all of this is, here you can see here within the HA cluster. I even have a very nice map, easily one of the most symmetrical maps that's out there for how all these things are interconnected. A couple other important points here is that the VSA has a couple of options here within the screen to enter cluster maintenance mode, meaning you would make adjustments to the cluster itself, or if you need to reconfigure the network. Now, interestingly enough, if you do either of these, doing so requires turning off all the virtual machines across the entire cluster. If you try to go into reconfigure network mode, you're going to essentially make the entire cluster unavailable. So you are getting HA here, but you're sort of not at the same time, because to make any of these large-scale changes requires essentially an outage. When you do create those virtual machines, okay, and you go up here and right-click and choose to create a new virtual machine, be aware that there are some other interesting limitations here as well, not the least of which is the fact that a VSA cluster does not support the use of memory over commitment. You simply cannot assign more memory than is available, or you can't assign more memory than is available. Right? So if I have 5 virtual machines, each of which has 16 gigs of RAM, well, I have to have 5 times 16 gigs of RAM in that in the summation of the hosts to be able to support that. And the way that you would go about that is by actually setting a memory reservation on a virtual machine to reserve all of the guest's memory. I'm not going to go through the process of creating a virtual machine so I can show you, but when you're creating those virtual machines, be aware that in the resource allocation panel, you're going to want to set the checkbox to reserve all guest memory so that you don't end up overcommitting your memory. The VSA does not like that whenever you do that. So this is really how you'll operate with that VSA. When you've got it, the next step is to create virtual machines, and you've already seen that, so there's nothing left to see here. But this is the functionality that the VSA provides, and also just some of the cautions associated with those sorts of limitations in this 1.0 release of the appliance that could come back and bite you depending on what you want out of your vSphere environment. So what we talked about in this nugget, we've talked about how you would go about configuring the vSphere storage appliance. I did mention in the first part of this nugget that the architecture for this VSA almost makes me chuckle just a little bit, because you really do get what you ask for. And I spent some time helping you understand what the architecture of the VSA, both in its 2-server and 3-server architecture configuration, also the use case for when you might deploy it. If you don't have a storage area network and you're not looking to get one anytime soon, the VSA can be potentially a good thing for you. Talked about how you can appropriate host resources and also the client resources too. Be aware of that memory overcommit problem, and make sure also that you configure the hosts so that they have essentially one big large volume with which to be able to cut out the necessary bits the VSA will use and then make highly available. We talked about then how to configure the ESXi hosts, configure those storage networks, and then ultimately deploy and configure the VSA manager and work with its storage resources. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.